I'm Natalie Nidham, your host. Welcome back to the show. In today's episode, I'm sitting down with my good friend and amazing doctor, Dr. Gus Vickery. And fair warning, I put myself under the microscope a little bit on this one. We walked through my own metabolomics testing and what showed up after a stretch of heavy travel, a whole lot of stress, and me taking what I thought was a harmless break from supplements. Turns out that even when you feel great, your cells may be telling a slightly different story. We talk about mitochondrial health, nutrient depletion, and why foundational support isn't optional as life gets busier. Now, this episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth, Nature's Marvels Bioregulators, and Blue Peptide Spray from Young Goose, all with special offers just for you. Check out the show notes below for details, and then let's dive into this episode. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Gus Vickery. It is an absolute pleasure to have you back.
Natalie, it is always an absolute pleasure for me to get to dialogue with you and hang out, and an honor to be on your show.
Oh, well, poof, blushing. Well, you know, the best part of doing an episode with you, it means we got to talk a whole bunch of times beforehand just to prep.
I know, and it's been a long time since we caught up, and there's so much going on out there. You know more about it than I do.
No, I mean, you know what? But here's the thing, right? I'm out there kind of like the busy bee, checking out all the different flowers, sampling different nectars. And you're back at the hive making the honey and the honeycomb and killing the invaders and wrapping them up in propolis and doing all this. Sure, it's not a bad way to look at it.
No, it's not a bad way to look at it. But yeah, I'm glad you're out there scouting for all those new molecules that we can bring back to the hive and get better results.
We're going to talk about today, actually, primarily is testing. We're going to get into some testing because, well, we both know the folks over at Theriome quite well. And they agreed that I would run my test and you and I we're not deep diving into my results, folks. So don't be whipping out your pens and pencils going, okay, what's really going on under the surface? But I ran a test at the end of the summer, which was really enlightening. The results were not necessarily what I was hoping to see, but upon reflection, what I realized is I did that thing where I took a total break almost from supplements and got a little lazy. And so I think that it would be great to just talk a little top line about what you saw, because so much of what we're seeing right now is we're encouraging people, don't take too many supplements, like cut back, prune. And there's a lot of wisdom there. But this really brought home to me, and we're going to talk about it, this idea of foundational supplements and how they vary from person to person. So I'm going to let you kind of take it away here, but maybe you can just explain what you really noticed in these results, especially around the metabolites that reflect like the heavy travel, the stress, the sleep patterns, the recovery, like all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, the score was not what a superstar health expert like you would be. And it's so humbling of you to present this to your audience. But also, we'll talk a little bit more about the implications of Theriome and what is its role as part of the diagnostic survey, in a little bit here. But we also had some blood testing that you had updated, and there was a gut test, which we might not get into too much, but it plays into that because we know how the gut biome and metabolites being produced via the gut metabolome are directly influencing mitochondrial function. And so it's a system. We'll always say that over and over again. It's a system.
Yeah. And I think what's important to note is when the discussion we're having and the results we looked at are the intersection of all three of those. It wasn't one test.
That's right.
So, I think that's important. And one thing I want to really emphasize on Theriome is it's primarily sold as a practitioner tool.
Yes.
And there's a good reason for that. And that is that if you don't know what you're looking at and you don't know how to interpret it, you get really upset, confused, and overwhelmed. There's a lot of information here.
Yes.
So,
and the key is that cross-pollination with other data and the subjective presentation of that individual, because as you reported, you feel great. You're doing well. Energy is good. Overall things are good. And that's an important piece of data that ties into this, because ultimately metabolomics, which I'll show in just a moment, the test, it's a unique and very powerful lens into what's going on in a human system biochemically, being impacted by all inputs, not simply, your nutritional status or what your gut biome is producing, but your stress, your sleep, and your exercise. All these things are influencing the metabolome. And so I do believe it's a very powerful tool. It's part of my staple workup for all patients I see now. We always include a Therium panel along with the other data that I collect on patients, which still includes comprehensive blood tests, body composition and bone density with DEXA, arterial screenings, tox panels, possibly gut panels. Like, we're still looking at a lot of various endpoints. And what I'll say thus far is I've seen a high congruency with what Therium is reporting and concluding about that system with the other tests that I'm running, which has helped me to build my confidence in this tool, and that it is accurately assessing these biochemical domains, and then meaningfully applying those to what does that look like from a standpoint of cell function, human function. But the interpretation is critical, and there's so much knowledge out there. Right? Like, it's incredible how much, and I love it. It's wonderful. Like, all the different knowledge around different diagnostics, different aspects of human health, behavioral interventions, molecules, peptides, and now regenerative therapeutics. There's so much information, but actually how you apply that knowledge is where the power is. Right. And that application piece is critical. And I think especially for consumers who might not have structured education in any kind of health domain. They might be a very educated consumer. They may know more than a lot of doctors and probably do about peptides and regen. But at the end of the day, the actual putting it together into a story that makes sense around this human system, and then the hierarchy of interventions you would create, that really does take, I believe, clinical experience. AI might get there eventually. It's not there right now. Right. At the end of the day, AI can be very helpful. It can give you some guidance, but it's not skilled and nuanced in its interpretation capabilities.
Well, and you'd even said that the way that you work with these results has evolved a lot over the last year, because when I first look at that little wheel there, I was like, okay, I'm not, this can't be good. But the cool, I think what's great is being able to put it into context for people.
Some orientation to the report. And I think it's awesome when people in our domain, I've done a lot of my case, like a lot of times when I'm presenting case studies, I've just presented my own data over time, right? Because I learn a lot by just looking at that and sharing, and people saying I'm a fellow human being, right? Like, I'm not a perfect specimen of biological health. I have impacts of my profession and life and other things, and not every habit do I have dialed in perfectly. And it's good for people to recognize that, because I think sometimes the bar of people are trying to attain to, or expecting, not trying is good, expecting to attain to is unreasonable for most people, and they're putting too much pressure on themselves, which is adding to the sympathetic dominance, which we'll talk about later.
Which will be our next topic.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when we're looking at this test, real quick orientation. So obviously we have these various domains that we can meaningfully create some interpretations based on looking at biochemical metabolites, right? And so we have aging, nutrition, inflammation, mitochondria, cardiovascular, which isn't just arterial function. It gets into cardiac contractility and electrophysiology, hormone management, really phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification processes in the liver, bone metabolites, neurocognition, skin, toxin. Now, I do like this because while I'm still looking at a toxin panel, one, I've seen great congruency, because later you'll see they actually index to the toxins that are creating the biochemical impact for this measurement. And what I've seen is it matches pretty well with the actual inventory of toxicants I have on that particular individual. Now, the pink is where you don't want to be. The pink is like, this is like impairment, dysfunctional pathways. You probably need to intervene in these particular areas. So what's that?
No, there's a couple of areas that need some attention.
And specifically aging for the longevity podcast.
Which is bizarre because, every other metric of aging I get is good. And so this is where understanding that this tool is a predictive tool, this is the this is the canary in the coal mine.
Yes.
Before anything really shows up.
Yeah.
Because if you look at most of my other testing results, I'm killing it. Like I'm over a decade younger than my chronological age. I've got all this great data that I can run around waving a banner at. If I go to a glycan age tomorrow, I'll be 20 years old. Amazing. And yet.
Yeah. But this is what is right now at a biochemical level. There's an enormous amount of research. This is heavily based in biomedical sciences, published research, right? They've been publishing on the metabolome and critical metabolite ratios for decades. We just didn't have the ability to create the interpretations because the data set's too complex. Yeah. And AI is what has, facilitated the fact that we can finally really create more specific interpretations. But yeah, at the time, your aging pathways, which are multiple pathways, cell cleanup, autophagy, oxidative stress, membrane physiology, they're not doing well. Now, remember the context. She stopped all her basic support. And even if she is 20 from bioglycan age, actually, she's still 62. Okay.
Yeah. So, almost.
Yeah. Well, sorry. Almost 62.
Okay. Right? Another month. Yeah.
And so, this one's, if you're in the yellow, you're in technically what's called the normative range. You'd rather be high normative than low normative. And so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be intervening, but there's usually going to be a subdomain within that area that might be unique where that's what you need attention. And what you would typically see is it's going to actually cross match with other subdomains for other areas, meaning we don't really have to use a individual tool for every one of these subdomains. There's some common tools that are going to work across all of them.
That's what I was going to say. Like once you're working on one thing, it's going to drive, they're going to be interconnected. Yeah. So,
we know that your NADH balance was terrible at the time of this test, right? We know that, and we have reasons for that, actually. That is going to massively impact aging pathways, DNA repair, mitochondrial function, inflammatory, all of it. Fixing that alone can have a global effect on the metabolome, right? Yeah. And so, so these are where Natalie is scoring right now. And this out here is their predictive score, which is generally pretty accurate if there are no major confounders and people are reasonably compliant with the intervention plans. And we'll talk about the intervention plans in just a moment. But you can see that, this is actually a pretty big movement over months, right? To be able to go from, a 42 out to whatever this total would be, substantially higher and into the high normative and some things optimal tells us that this is a biochemical system that's modifiable, right? Yeah. This is not a system that is deeply entrained into dysfunction and probably resistant to change, which is what happens in disease states. Yeah. When you've migrated into disease, the body has done every compensation it can to keep you alive. It's doing a good job of that. And now beginning to get these pathways to correct, you have to bring the sledgehammer, not, just the little precise toolkit.
Yeah. Which is probably what's happening now, right? Like I'm tapping out my reserves.
Yes.
Or not now, but what I was at the time of this test, when I had stopped everything, I was basically depleting my reserves.
That's right.
It just hasn't shown up yet.
Yeah. So this is a metabolome that bounces back quickly, right? With just the right inputs, just getting some things back in play that were needed. And again, we'll emphasize not always. I mean, I have patients who come in and have multiple chronic diseases and they have terrible metabolomics reports. And so it can be correlated to disease to some extent. But generally speaking, in healthy people who feel well that don't have diagnoses, we're way upstream of disease, meaning this could go on potentially for years before you're even seeing it in your blood metrics. Right?
Yeah, that's an experiment I'm not running.
Yeah, no reason to run that experiment. Fix early. And I think the younger you start with accessing information like this, where all you really need is a little bit of fine tuning and modification, and you just keep this metabolome tuned to whatever optimal is for you, then the better opportunity you have to resist disease and stay healthy and feel good. Now, also what's realistic for optimal, right? For an aging population, and depending on the context, stress, travel, toxin exposure, et cetera. And their newer reports will start doing some indexing towards age so that you're not being compared with 20-year-olds.
So
20-year-old.
so let's talk about that a tiny bit. I wanted the last couple of things I want to touch on this test, and then I want to move on to our other topics because we don't want this podcast to be all about me. Hey folks, I just wanted to throw a little message in here for those of you who are sending me all these incredible questions on social media or through YouTube or even on Spotify, wherever you're listening to the podcast. I wish I could get back to you, each one of you personally, but unfortunately I can't. And because I cannot, I created about a couple of years ago now, I created a membership community where I get to hang out with people just like you. I do live weekly Q&As, almost weekly anyway. We also do have podcast guests come in to answer everybody's questions and do presentations. You get to interact live with those podcast guests. We will sometimes do challenges with some of the partners. Like in 2026, we have a mitochondrial enhancement challenge coming up where we're going to be testing mitochondrial function. We're going to be testing people's deuterium levels. If you haven't heard about deuterium, we've got podcasts coming down the pipes on that. And then people will be invited to follow a personalized protocol and then retest their mitochondria on the other side. We offer that in the membership community, and we do it at incredible discounts that you just can't find anywhere else. So if you're interested in hanging out with me and other like-minded people, which actually happen to include some pretty awesome practitioners and even some previous podcast guests who've come and joined the community, then I invite you to check it out on my website, natnidham.com/the-longevity-community, or just go to natnidham.com and look for the longevity community tab at the top of the page. Click on that and see if this is right for you. I would love to see you there. And we could make 2026 our best year ever together. So once again, that's natnidham.com. Just look for the longevity community tab at the top of the page. Now let's get back to the show. Number one, what do you think the 3 or 4 early signals are that we really need to pay attention to? And you pointed to the aging one, which is the DNA damage. Aging, is that the DNA repair?
No, well, mutational load's DNA repair, but that's not looking great either. I mean, these two walk hand in hand.
Yeah, but it's not as bad as the aging.
No, but mutational load, aging, inflammation, mitochondria could all be integrated into a kind of a common domain, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So so basically hack at that, go with that. And then the 2 ones at the bottom.
So we're looking at our liver processing, and this is going to tie right back into not only, but the glutathione that we talked about, and then bone metabolic pathways. Now, the big themes of your report are nutrient depletion and oxidative stress, right? Which right? Like we weren't using our typical broad-based higher dose essential nutrient support. And as much as we wish the food would provide it, good luck there. And especially with biomes that have been altered by our environments and age and stress. So we're not going to go through every one of these in detail. I'm just going to point out a few key points. So under each domain, they're giving you your score, right? Aging is not great at this point. We want to target it. And they have subdomains that affect aging. So cellular repair and longevity are getting into autophagy pathways. And then fatty acid and cell membrane health, which is critical. Like cell membranes, you've already been beating that drum on this podcast a lot, right? Cell membranes. That's like ground zero of mitochondrial function, because mitochondria are dependent upon their membranes. And at baseline, for most people with mitochondrial issues, it's the original insult is an unhealthy biochemical environment with high oxidative stress. But the end result of that are membranes with holes punched in them. You can no longer maintain mitochondrial voltage in cases like that. And that membrane repair process of getting the right things loaded back in to help manage the oxidative stress and rebuild those membranes. If you just do it the natural way, you're talking 9 months of a process, which means if you've got a syndrome of fatigue, cognitive fatigue, whatever, from mitochondrial dysfunction, and you've eliminated the cause, whether it's chronic infection, heavy toxicant burden, or you've minimized it at least, or stress or sleep deprivation, and now you're in repair phase, you don't expect in 3 weeks that you're popping back, right? You'll be feeling better, but it's a long game you're playing, of getting this system. Now, there are peptides that can accelerate that and allow you to play a faster game, but this one's really key. And then we're seeing that, cellular energy production is impaired. And part of that, you can look at your low adenosine level, which is a sign of low ATP turnover, right? So energy flux is reduced. There's a lot of other things that go into adenosine, but that's one of them. But niacinamide, one of our substrates for niacin, you see it up here, but it really should be up here.
Yeah.
Okay? And then glutathione, right? Which, of course, as we age, we're producing less, plus it's being overtaxed with all the additional toxicant work it's doing on top of its regular job of managing oxidative stress and other chemical processes. That's very low. So these are pretty, key. And if we just kind of go down and we want to go once again, we see fatty acid and lipid balance, right? Which is going to tie into membranes again. And so some of the other nutrients, and maybe if I don't find them, I'll just tell, like our nicotinic acid, our other form of niacin was not optimal. Alpha-tocopherol was not optimal. There's a vitamin B6 metabolite that was not optimal. Alpha-linoleic acid, an important fatty acid for mitochondrial membrane structural integrity, that was low. And you get the theme, right? I don't probably have to say a whole lot more about that. The bottom line was your diet wasn't providing adequate levels of essential macro and micronutrients just to support normal biochemical function. And that alone is a massive mover with this. Like, you could make one argument of, let's just fix nutritional sufficiency and see what happens.
Yeah, but we're going to go a little further. I'm going to go a little further than that. And I would say
62, not 25. At 20, this is the report on a 25-year-old. I may simply say, let's just fix the nutrient. Let's optimize nutrient availability and see what happens.
This is probably maybe a month after I'd stopped crazy travel, crazy disruption. It's just really interesting and eye-opening. And what it tells me is those breaks of everything are not an option.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I've got enough stress on my system all the time.
Yep.
That's the time to kind of really lean into all the core foundational supplements, because that's when I'm rebuilding.
Yeah, you are
the stress of travel.
The demand pressure that you're putting on your system, cognitively and physically, is huge, right? Like, you need your biochemical system isn't being asked to deal with, just sort of a minimal threshold of performance. It's having to maintain high cognitive load, high physical load on top of circadian rhythm disruption from travel, stress of travel, exposures of travel. So you've got to push in with more robust support for these systems than somebody who might be in a retirement phase and really has their life centered around rest, recovery, and relaxation.
All right. So net, guys, I think what we wanted to bring to this discussion was, that this tool. And I recorded a podcast with the guys at Therium last year. The test has come a long way. And I just wanted to provide a snapshot of how it's being used a year out now and how it's evolved. And so, all I'm going to take all of Dr. Vickery's recommendations to heart, and I'm back on the program. And I actually have been back on my program for a little while. So I'll probably do a retest in 6 months, and fingers crossed, everything will have bounced back.
And I anticipate that's the case. And real quickly on the mitochondrial side, what we see are multiple blocks in energy pathways. And then this NAD balance is not good, which is, of course, a critical molecule. And so we won't go through the whole digital twinning where they actually create your own intervention plan. They don't mean for people to adopt all these interventions. The model is based on adopting, 60% of them. They're very specific. They use a process called digital twinning. They clone your metabolome 1,000 times. Their AI engine basically looks at all the research-based inputs that could be used to shift a metabolome, runs 1,000 experiments, picks the best of 1,000 for you. So it's very helpful. And anything that's easy, you should do. But in Natalie's case, we would focus on NAD replenishment, starting first with making sure she's got adequate niacin, right? But then, in her particular case, they're suggesting that nicotinamide riboside at 500 milligrams will be the best preloader for NAD versus say NMN or other approaches. And then, getting back on her glutathione support and optimizing nitric oxide pathways because they were showing impairment on this report, and fixing nutrient sufficiency in fatty acids so her cell membranes can be maintained and then she can maintain. Like that would be our focus in Natalie's case, right? Like which she's already done. She already got back on her protocol. And I don't know if now is a good time to segue into what would be that base level of support somebody might stay on. Even when they're taking breaks from their more intensive regimens or not. It's your show. You can.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the things that I should not ever have broken off of, and I know that from a genetic perspective, my nitric oxide production is not, my pathways are not optimized. My glutathione pathways are not optimized. Like I know this even from my genetic testing days. And so this was a bit of an experiment, and it was a short-term experiment. So the wheels haven't come too far off the bus, but things I won't be taking breaks from: glutathione support, NAD support, the omega-3s, the fatty 15, like all the PC oil, like all of the things to address the cell membrane.
Your B vitamins, your minerals, all of that, and your nitric oxide support.
And so, so the list is not that short, guys. Like, I mean, there's still, it's interesting, right? I think probably, and even spermidine is something.
Your levels were not optimal of spermidine. Yeah.
Exactly. And spermidine I'd kind of taken a break from. So it's just really, this was a really valuable experiment for me. And I'm hoping that people can learn from me without doing it themselves necessarily. And that is to understand the value of supplementation, like smart supplementation, in the sense that we will need it. And my stack might be different than the next person's stack, but there's that that nut of support that my body just needs to deal.
And everybody's body actually essential macro and micronutrients. So when I say macronutrients, I'm talking about essential fatty acids and adequate protein or essential amino acids at the dosing that's really required to fill our nutritional gaps, based partly on gut biome shifts that are affecting what's actually getting there, right? So we are having to use heavier doses than we'd like because of some other aspects. But the essential nutrient piece, and then depending on age and health, the antioxidant support, priming nitric oxide pathways and glutathione, making sure you're not beginning to drop off in that glutathione availability. Those are just critical, foundational. Most people are going to benefit from staying on at least that kind of core regimen. And then there might be other things their human system uniquely needs. On an ongoing basis. So
the last thing on Therium that I forgot we wanted to talk about, and that is that right now my results are being compared to the entire cohort of people. It's not being spread out across age.
Right.
And I'm actually grateful for that, because they are going to be moving into a world where my 60-something-year-old female self will be compared to a more age-appropriate group. Let's say women 55 to 75, for example. I don't know where their breaks are going to be. And in that cohort, I may have performed way better.
That's right.
From a comparative perspective. What I'm being compared to now is like the full spectrum of ages. So there's a lot of young people in there dragging down that number, correct?
Dragging down your number.
Well, dragging my number down and pulling up the number. So, but this is the thing, right? I'm actually grateful that I'm getting this, because my goal is to perform like a younger person. My goal is not to perform better than other people in my age group.
That's right.
Right. And so it would be interesting to see if when they bring out the new model where they're sequestering you into your proper age group and gender, how those numbers would have looked different if they were compared to my age group.
Yeah. And as we discussed in our pre-meeting, so I adopted these reports after you introduced me to the company. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's the B pollen I'm bringing back to the
That's right. Yeah. And I got to, and you know me, I'm constantly vetting diagnostic tools. And there are a lot of great tools out there, many of which add marginal value to what we're doing, right? It's overkill. It's more information that's needed, or it's not information that's really clinically validated yet. And so I'm very selective about what tests am I going to bring into the model. And this one's become a cornerstone test along with other tests. I don't look at it as a solo test. You need more context to interpret these results. But the test is continually evolved. They're continually improving their technology. Their machine learning is rapidly evolving. It's not far down the road that we'll have not only the metabolome, but the proteome and the transcriptome and full genome sequencing. And we'll be playing a whole new ballgame in precision medicine with that. Because what we're looking at here are things I used to have to intuit, make educated guesses at. I believe there's probably a membrane problem based on a fatty acid balance test that I had, some oxidative stress numbers. I believe that and how that patient's reporting their energy and performance. So we're going to start by working on cell membranes and doing these other things. Now I can actually know, right? This is where the problems are. And that helps me a lot when it comes to this huge toolbox of therapeutics, behavioral interventions, technologies, and peptides to really dial it into what's really needed in this human system, and what's not. And because there, as we also know, as you run all these amazing podcasts with brilliant researchers who have new molecules, good molecules that many people could benefit from, if you just keep stacking one after the other and other into your protocol, one, you're spending a lot of money. There's a lot of time and effort. You're probably creating stress response to some extent, feeling like, you got to manage all of this, which is working against your system. And you might be creating biochemical confusion for your body. Many times I find people who come in to see me and who have big stacks of peptides that they're essentially, just as an example, they're actually priming AMPK and mTOR at the same time, right? Yeah. They're not, it's like a real common one. And it's like, and so you've got to understand these systems and how they work in balance and where you're trying to take the body over a given phase. And this test has helped me a lot, but I don't look at it exclusively. I think their intervention plans are great, but they would tell you that they don't have peptides on these intervention lists. No. Peptides, and so there are certain areas where I see certain domains, for instance, where we have a cell membrane problem or a mitochondrial membrane problem. And we've got to make sure the phospholipids and maybe plasmalogens and the essential fatty acids and all of these are made available to the cell so it can do the repair. But then we can bring in a peptide like SS31, which stabilizes cardiolipin and accelerate that membrane repair. Meanwhile, if you're not having an issue with mitochondrial membrane performance and you're trying SS31 because everybody tells you it improves your energy, maybe you felt an energy boost, but that was probably psychosomatic because it's actually not doing much for you in that particular state.
Such a good point.
Yeah. And so it's great for us to be able, and what's ending up happening though, is that people who are wanting to use every therapeutic because they all sound so awesome are a little disappointed because they wanted more. I'm like, no, we're going to be doing less.
We're pulling back. Or people who jump into MOTS-C before having done the membrane work.
That's right.
Or not doing the membrane work.
And this is like preaching to the choir, but I see it all the time because peptides have become popular and they have for a good reason. And people are jumping to them based on reading about them and yet have not done any of this foundational work that would actually set their biological system up to respond optimally to that peptide. And so it's like you can't skip these foundations, which is what you did temporarily to take a well-deserved break from all the craziness.
But the good news is all my CAMT score was 0. So I've got no plaque in my carotid. I've no thickening of the carotid arteries. Like my brain function score was amazing. Like when I did this blood work, right around the time that I ran this test, it was also accompanied by lots of other functional testing.
Your VO2 max looked good. A lot of those you did the hand grip strength and core strength and all those assessments looked good for you.
Yeah. So but this is making sure we shore it up and we stay.
Yeah, this is deeper, more granular work, but I think very necessary work if you want the results of living as long as you can and as healthy of a body.
As healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So now let's leave the test behind and let's move into another topic that underpins all of this, right? And this is this whole mindset, toxicity, like the sympathetic state. These are the foundations under the foundations, if you will. And I think that this is it's a big theme that's coming up in your work, is what you're seeing in terms of what we call sympathetic dominance, which we could call chronic stress or being in fight or flight. And I'd love to invite you to kind of talk about what you're seeing and how in your mind is this affecting all this metabolomic data, or frankly, even just people's ability to stay healthy or reclaim their health?
Massively. And if it's not being addressed, I'm not saying that there's no benefit. I mean, of course, still maintaining nutrients and antioxidants and all these things are always going to be helpful. But if you're not working on rebalancing your autonomic nervous system, you're still ultimately going to be going backwards. I mean, there is nothing that has a greater impact on pace of aging, epigenetic aging, and, chronic sympathetic dominance also has direct impacts on gut integrity. It'll create gut hyperpermeability independent of like toxins and molecules doing that. It has a direct impact on the actual health and diversity of the gut biome. And then it has a direct impact on central nervous system inflammatory pathways and oxidative stress, which have a direct impact on neurotransmitter synthesis and neurotransmitter balance. This is so critical. I began recognizing this, like a decade ago, I think, when I ran my own first epigenetic age test. Who knows how accurate they were then? I was 45. The result was that of a 63-year-old. It was purely a telomere length. Yeah. And it caught my eye because at 45, I had recovered from the first 12 years of starting a medical clinic and having 3 kids. I had begun to get back into good fitness and my sleep was good. And although I would have self-reported my stress as low because I felt motivated and excited about the work I was doing, the truth was that it was a ridiculous amount of demand pressure I was putting on my system, running my business, seeing massive loads of patients, doing everything I was doing. And when I did the deep dive into the impacts on epigenetic age, it was clear that stress was the one thing that I wasn't sensing it. I thought, I'm doing great because I used positive psychology to retranslate my life into this is all awesome, which is a healthy thing to do. And so I had tuned out the fact that my body was living in threat state physiology all the time. That's what drove me to heart rate variability in the early days of heart rate variability. And my heart rate variability was deceptively solid. But then if you got into the apps that break it down into frequency inputs, I was pinned against the far side of sympathetic dominance. Pinned.
No kidding.
And I tried all the hacks because I'm like, man, I got to keep doing what I'm doing. And none of it budged it. It didn't budge it. It just was stuck there. And so that was where I began to rebalance how I was going to approach my professional career in a way that gave me more rest, recovery, and just time back in the woods and things like that. And I did. And it took years and years, but eventually my autonomic nervous system did rebalance. Now we can do it faster with some technologies that have come to the market. But at the end of the day, it took a long time. Interestingly enough, 7 years later, when I repeated epigenetic age with DNA methylation and had taken big stacks of bioregulatory peptides and rebalanced my autonomic nervous system, my epigenetic age came back as a 45-year-old when I was 52.
There you go.
Yeah. So that was a 20, to the extent this was accurate, right, which we don't know. That was a 21-year swing in epigenetic age over a stretch where I aged 7 years. And I do think bioregulatory peptides played a big role in that. But anyway, I began to do an inventory on my own patients about their stress and just observing them. And I began to realize that even like the non-stressed, non-depressed, high performer, super uber athlete, corporate, these people, their systems were tanking because of stress. And I knew it. But it was like, what was the answer? The answer was a lot of spiritual practices, rebalancing, how you reset your environment, the expectations you place upon yourself. And that's just not easy for people. And for some people, it's not even optional. The demands of their life are such that they can't really put boundaries around it at that particular time. But that maybe not at that time, but they need to begin to forecast when they could. Yeah. And so this is like critical. And for instance, I have one of these uber specimen guys who incredibly athletic, incredibly fit, does everything. And when I first met him, his data wasn't looking great because he wasn't taking care of the basics and he was putting huge demand pressure. But then once we got him on the foundational stuff, it all cleaned up. It was beautiful. His metabolomic data was near optimal and he was in his early 50s. And then in 6 months later, his metabolome had all contracted down, other than toxicant, which was better because we had been working on that. But everything else was contracted down. And the one variable that had changed for him was he was going through a very hostile divorce. And I knew it. And it was working on him. And so we got on to all these interventions and I'm like, the bottom line is that this is stress. Right? Stress has shifted your entire metabolism. It's that powerful. It can do that to you. And so it is absolutely critical that you're doing the right inventory on it. And you can't, if you're a person who's really invested in mindset, you can't necessarily trust your own interpretations about the impact of stress. Heart rate variability is a very helpful metric for this.
Are you talking about like the heart math tool, stuff like that?
Yeah. And then being able to take heart rate variability and find out what are those frequency inputs, because mine was actually deceptively high for somebody who had such high sympathetic dominance in terms of the frequency inputs. And so, being able to understand that and then being able to track that over time and seeing if it's beginning to shift. And people will use all kinds of interventions, molecules, hoping to shift HRV. Rarely do I see that work. What I do see work is when they begin to actually push in, again, speaking about this in a more vague way, spiritual practices that allow them to begin to operate more out of a sense of safety rather than threat and vigilance.
So what you're saying, if I'm hearing you properly, is there's no supplement, there's no tech, there's nothing that's going to really be able to push that lever for you. If it's a lever that's a factor for you, which it may or may not be, but nothing is going to move that lever until you've done that inner work.
That's right.
And that may or may not. Now, do you think that doing the inner work can offset if your life doesn't change? Like you still have a crazy life. You're still running on all cylinders. Is there a threshold of things that still need to be met for that inner work to translate into better outcomes?
It's a great question. Yeah. And briefly, I do want to acknowledge technologies can be helpful for this.
For sure.
Right. They could possibly slow the progression. They might help bring you back a little closer, but they can't fix it. Right. That's internal. I do think some of the new vagal nerve stimulators, Katrine will disagree with me on this, but I've seen results with patients using some of the new devices that have some published data where over an 8 or 12 week period, we're seeing heart rate variability come up and sleep scores improve, and with that being the only intervention. So I do think technology, brain mapping and neurofeedback and heart math, all these things can absolutely be helpful, and they can at least teach you how to recognize when your nervous system has been triggered, and because you'll feel it when you go out of coherence. Right. Like if you've learned what coherence feels like, you'll know the feeling I've gone out, and something, a tool like heart math, you can learn how to quickly get yourself back to at least coherence. So that's going to at least mitigate to some extent the negative impacts of this. But that internal state really has a lot to do with interpretation around threat or safety. Right. And right now, the vast majority of inputs coming into us via social media, be it news, the political environment, other people who have been trained by these systems, is generally going to provoke us into threat state. Right. Like things are not okay. You are not okay. And there are real problems in the world, and there's real volatility. And for some individuals, they may be dealing with a medical challenge, financial challenge, or a loved one that's sick. We're all going to encounter these things. But when you multiply on top of that everything else, right, you feel completely out of control, even if you don't necessarily, your nervous system knows there's nothing I can do about a lot of this. You feel completely out of control. And it's how we perceive stress that plays a big role, whether it's a negative or non-negative, and a lack of agency over it. Being disempowered is a major contributor to this issue. And so how you begin to recognize that at the end of the day, it's about, am I threatened or am I safe? Right. And you may be in certain domains feeling a little threatened right now. It could be financial, it could be health, it could be a loved one. But then there are a lot of other domains where you're totally safe. And for most of us, probably listening to this podcast, in general, we are safe. Right. The core drivers of ancestral stress are just not an issue for us. We probably have a stable living environment with, the ability to mitigate extreme temperatures and availability of food and water. And if we live in a relatively safe place, aren't necessarily, there's a low statistical likelihood that we're going to have violence or something like that happen to us. Right. So all of those things. So like, I'm alive. I've got a body that's working for me. Hopefully I have some degree of family or social support. I have a system. Connectivity is critical, right? Human connectivity, social isolation, a huge player in this. I'm connected to other people. I have nurturing relationships. At the end of the day, anything could happen this day, but in general, I'm safe. And I do have agency because today I have a living human body that has amazing capacity inbuilt into it. I have an ability to go out and begin to engage in life in a way that can produce a different, set of circumstances for me eventually. And so really in training to that and beginning to, because what's happening is the times where we should just be at ease and non-vigilant, at home safe, tucked away after dinner with family on a Sunday, on a day off, on a hike in the woods, we're not. We're actually in threat state. And so we're not getting, And then that autonomic nervous system is entrained, meaning it becomes a habit. It's just where it lives. It's not like every day you wake up with a fresh new start and a nervous system that's just ready for what's going to happen today. You are now waking up already under a sense of threat. And everything you're doing is under a sense of threat, whether you're perceiving it as threat or not. That's what's going on. And threat state physiology is unique and distinct from safe state physiology. And so the internal work and the environmental work, the type of sound environment, the lighting environment, the social environment, who you connect with, that's going to be critical for being able to cultivate this calming, I'm okay, everything is all right, safety. And if you're not working towards that, then you're going to be entrained into a threat state all the time, just based on our society and the way things go and the pressures of life. And no matter all the peptides and molecules you want to use, you're going to age at an accelerated rate and you're going to end up having challenges.
Right. So the takeaway from this section is finding a way to find that inner balance. And there might be some tech that can help you. The heart math, it's funny, I haven't even done a podcast with them yet, and I probably mention them more often than anything else on this podcast. The heart math tool is wildly easy to use. It's not very expensive. And it trains you to train yourself to get out of a sympathetic state so that eventually you're just better at doing that for yourself. But the big takeaway here is investing in the skill and getting rid of the practices that are keeping you in that sympathetic state. And maybe even investing in some technology would be one of the most worthwhile foundational things you can do for your health and pace of aging.
Yeah. And sleep, obviously. Is
sleep, obviously.
Obviously. You summed it up nicely.
Yeah. Okay. Because I want to move on. I want to move on to toxicity and detox. So one of the things when we were talking about earlier that you talked about quite dramatically, because everybody's talking about mold, and definitely mold is a big deal. A lot of people talk about Lyme, but you've seen a dramatic increase in a particular toxicant that has left you actually really surprised. And you were talking
the heavy metals.
Heavy metals. And so do you think that there's more exposure? Do you think that our detox pathways are more impaired? Like, what do you think? Because you were yourself, you were like, I'm shocked. Like, I'm seeing numbers I've never seen before. So,
and I'm seeing heavy metals I've never seen before.
That's what I mean.
These are accurate
actual metals.
Yeah, these are reports that are accurate. Right. This is what was in your system that you were excreting. And that's only showing you what was excreted at a given time. It's not showing you what all is stored. And there can be acute exposures. If you go for an MRI with gadolinium, you're going to have high gadolinium for a period of time until you clear it. Some people don't detox it that well. And so they probably need to be on a focused detox at that time. But nonetheless, a lot of these are just kind of chronic. And, about 5-6 years ago when I began running these tox panels, because I realized that we're going to have to dig deeper because there's, at first I was also distrustful of the data because it was just already bad, right? As we've talked about plenty, the glyphosate levels on everybody off the chart. That's gotten actually better. I think that might be a lot of awareness and people going to more organic. But a lot of other organophosphates, pesticides, herbicides are still there. Phthalates, parabens, plasticizers. I don't think I've seen anybody with optimal BPA. It's like, I don't know how we're going to mitigate.
You can't get away from it.
You can't get away from it. And it has real biological impacts. But, again, your biological system is robust and resilient and really well designed, and it can handle some negative inputs as long as it's not being overwhelmed by them and it has what it needs to function well. So I don't get all worked up if I see a high level of BPA on my tox panel, which I see every time. As long as others are being managed and other systems, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to believe a plasticizer is going to determine my destiny, right? Like, I'm just not.
Well, because talk about stress, right? Talk
Yeah.
about not feeling safe. Like if you're feeling attacked from the inside, it's pretty hard to do this, any kind of spiritual work that's going to offset that.
Yeah.
But you just said something really important that I just want to highlight for the audience, which is coming back to trusting your body. And what we're going to try to do here, and what this part of the conversation on heavy metals and toxins is going to focus on, is what can we diminish the load so that the body can go back to dealing with what it can deal with.
Yeah.
Right. So
an enormous part of the work I'm doing with people, even sick people who come in, is really focused on the psychological aspects of restoring confidence in their own body, their body's self-healing, self-regenerating capacity, given that it has the right information to work with to do so. And I'm convinced I've seen terrible diseases that we didn't think there was any way to reverse, greatly improve. Right. Like I've seen health restoration in people you didn't think, it's just been too long, they're too sick, but they bought in and they were willing to do it. And we used big intensive protocols, and it was a long game, 2, 3, 4 years. But it's remarkable, the case studies that we can present. But nonetheless, what I started seeing, on those tox reports originally, I was already disturbed by. We started working on those things, but didn't see many heavy metals. Occasionally, there was the mercury in people who were eating a lot of sushi or seafood, or also had mercury fillings. And occasionally, there were trace amounts of sometimes lead, and if, a little bit of arsenic that's heavily contaminating the food supply. Now, the person I saw just before we did this podcast, we've got cesium, beryllium, cadmium, titanium, lead, arsenic, mercury, gadolinium, and she did not get in it, like all of these heavy metals. And now I want to be clear to the audience. This is just my observations in a clinic, right? This isn't a human study. This isn't population level data, but this is hundreds of people that I've assessed over a continuity of time, right? And what I've seen is a major increase in the quantity and the number of different variants of heavy metals on these tox reports, which I know are having biological impact. Your own tox section of your therium, your mycotoxins look pretty good. Just
like it was actually not bad. Yeah.
Actually, most of it looked pretty good. There were industrial chemicals, which are very hard to avoid. And there was BPA or plasticizers, and there was heavy metals, right? Yeah. And so the most common sources for the heavy metals are going to be the same as many of the other toxicants: food and water. Clear. I mean, like that's where we're probably getting most of these. We know dark chocolate was implicated with cadmium recently. It was like,
not if you're buying it from Katrine.
Yeah. Right. So, right. Yeah. And so and I don't know whether to one of your questions around why, I've thought about this a lot. And I do think it's both. I think it's a depletion of internal resiliency and its ability to deal with toxicant burden. But I also think there's probably been a tipping point we crossed with soil quality, groundwater quality, and just food manufacturing, and seafood, and also ocean pollution, where we just crossed over. And even if you're being very cautious with the foods that you purchase, trying to keep them clean, you're probably still getting some heavy metal contamination in there.
Yeah. So what do people do about it? How are you helping people how are you supporting people in this?
Well, obviously we proactively support endogenous detox systems and hopefully have them working the way they should be working. And then the gut biome plays a role in this. Gut biome is part of our detox, especially mycotoxins. And so working on the gut and the nutrient piece, all of that. And then we do have dedicated detox protocols. I typically use the Cell Core products because they work. I mean, they really do. And we have our heavy metal and envirotoxin binders and biotoxin binders and drainage activators. But then on the other side, we got to turn the faucet off. We don't turn the faucet off, we're not accomplishing anything. I ask all my patients, if feasible, to get whole house water filtration, a good system, right? Period.
Yeah, I literally got one yesterday.
Yeah, that makes it good. That makes a major difference. And a lot of this heavy metal contamination is now water, right? Municipal water. And many of sink filters and things like that I would be a fan of, if that's all you have, aren't necessarily going to clear all that. So, and then when you shower and skin is permeable, right? So like being able to bathe, brush your teeth, and cook with, and then drink water that's been heavily filtered, and then you can argue for the restructuralization, mineralization. Yeah, I agree with all that. But nonetheless, clear the poisons first. So I asked them to do that. And then when it comes to the food, I don't want people to get weird about food and be afraid to eat, right? I don't, because that's going to play right back into the stress thing, which arguably might have more bad impact than the toxin thing, right? So I'm like, when your friends all want you to meet at the Mexican restaurant, then go and eat. Maybe use a little extra glutathione if you're nervous, or take a binder, right? That's fine. I do that. If I eat sushi, I take a heavy metal binder every time. It's not hard to do, and I'm not stressed about it. But at the same time, recognizing that you're playing a percentage game. I think we talked about this yesterday. And the percentage you get to play is dependent on your health, right? Your fragility or your resiliency. If you've got an anti-fragile, highly resilient system that you've been building up and your metabolism is functioning well, then you probably can play a 20% game where 20% of the time you're just not going to think much about it. But 80%, and that's mostly going to be your home environment, the snack foods you have, the foods in your cupboard, the foods in your refrigerator, you have found reputable brands that have minimized toxin, and it's going to make a big difference. And then when you're eating out, you can certainly, if you got good restaurants that do farm to table from local organic farmers, sure, choose those. That's great. But yeah, you got to do the food thing. And if you're a more fragile person that is in a phase where you're trying to either reverse disease or you're at the tipping point of disease, you might need to play a 95% game or even 100% game for a season.
For a period of time.
Until you build back up that resiliency in your system. And then, of course, there's air. And I think everybody knows this. Now, the air pollutants are not where we're getting the heavy metals, but nonetheless, having the proper, I use both primary and secondary air filtration.
I was going to say, wouldn't air in a major city give you heavy metal? Wouldn't that?
It's a great question, and maybe it does.
Because I think that car exhaust does contain some heavy metals.
You're right. And if you were to get those, it's a question of in the pulmonary tree. I don't know the answer to the question, but it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because I'm going to go find out whether or not.
Because I've got two scrubbers, and I've got two of the Jasper scrubbers at my house. And it's it's almost like every time they have a sale, I'm going to add another one for another room kind of thing.
Yeah, I know. I have it running in multiple. I try to have my whole air. And when not that I'm seeing the microparticles, but when I change those filters every 6 months, just that more heavy particulate matter that it has caught.
It's a deal.
That my high gun HVAC system with built-in air purification has not been able to capture tells me I'm glad I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Because it's not subtle when I pull that filter out of there and replace it.
It looks very different than the new one. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so the air quality, and I do think you're probably right. When I look and read, because one of the things with the tox panels I run, they always have the most latest research. What are the likely sources of exposure? What are the health impacts of these heavy metals? And generally it's air and water. Usually it's water and food, and then exposures in manufacturing, except, things like that. And I haven't seen air coming up, but I'm really curious about this now, whether air is.
Well, and definitely like if you're on a plane, and so we've, I spend too much time on planes, and somebody just handed me a supplement stack to take when you're on the plane. And it's a specific binder, and the company, it's a new company, it's called Detox U. Just the letter U. And he's got an industrial binder complex and another one. And because when we're on planes, the exhaust from the plane, the recycled air, the materials in the plane, and it's, and this is not to freak people out or to make them crazy. These are relatively easy interventions, right? Yeah. You're not going to stop flying. You got to get from point A to point B. Okay, so if I need to fly, then I will do this. I will drink my molecular hydrogen. I will, I'll do the things. I've got my travel stack that hopefully is helping to mitigate. It's not going to do it all, but it is going to. Yeah, we're about lowering the volume here, just so that
that's it. That's it. Just give your body a little better playing field to work with is all, and you'll be fine, because I do believe human capacities are amazing, and we're not even scratching the surface of what really is built into our system from a capacity standpoint, into our DNA, our levels of robustness, resilience, cognitive capabilities, physical capabilities. And that's really, it's not really the longevity, which is the title. That's the journey we're on, is pushing in and wanting to know. We don't want to miss out on these capacities in our life. And we're willing to do these things so that we have that opportunity, regardless of whether we're in our late 50s, early 60s, or, even at a younger age. And so, I really want people to feel confident that their bodies can be healthy, but I can promise you there are things going on environmentally that include stress impacts, but also toxin exposures and lack of nutrients available in a lot of the food you're eating that are impacting your ability to access those capacities and potentially contributing to deficits in capacities. And that there are things that your unique human system needs programmed into it if you want to age well, period.
Yeah. I love this. So you've said that nutrient sufficiency is foundational. Mm-hmm. In metabolomic terms, mm-hmm. what does nutrient depletion look like? And I think we saw part of that in my metabolomic results.
Yes.
The depletion of glutathione showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you want to touch on those points quickly, and then I'm curious if you're seeing particular nutrients showing up over and over and over.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question.
People.
Yeah, and so from the standpoint of nutrient sufficiency, and we're talking about essential nutrients, I also believe polyphenols are important, phytonutrients are important. I think these are all important, but we're talking about the staple of essential molecules that we know our biochemistry is absolutely dependent upon. So that includes vitamins, minerals, and essential macronutrients, which often get missed in the conversation, which will include your essential fatty acids, which also include omega-6 fatty acids. And now with the seed oil craze, which I'm a fan of, I've gone from a problem of seeing people with too high of linoleic acid over and over in their cell membranes to now people with too low of linoleic acid.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I'm not. And it's creating problems for them.
So linoleic acid, you guys, is omega-6.
Yes, and it's an essential fatty acid. And
we die without it.
Yes, right. And so, for those folks who are absolutely mitigating exposures to, other than omega-3, but polyunsaturated fats, seed oils, you may actually need more linoleic acid. And so where would be a good place to get it? Because we know the processed seed oils from processed foods, those are not going to be your friend ever. Never. Yeah. But so organic nuts and seeds, and then things like flax oil or organic sesame oil or some of the, pine nut oil is actually really great.
Interesting.
And so some of the organic seed oils that are not vegetable corn, safflower, sunflower, corn and all that. And then nuts and seeds. And then I am a big fan because like many people, what I see is low alpha linoleic acid, which you had, which I used to put in a category of relatively inert biologically, but an important substrate to build DHA, DPA, and EPA out of. Just not efficient way to get there. Now we have a lot of really good research data showing that mitochondrial membrane structural integrity, alpha linoleic acid is playing a very important role in that. And so for individuals who can use more linoleic acid and certainly more alpha, I'll have them using organic ground flaxseed and organic ground chia seed, adding it to their smoothies or yogurts, just making sure it's fresh. If it's old, And for those who don't want to do that, and this is what I personally do, and my levels looked really good on my cell membrane test, I use an organic flax oil, and I just take a big swig of it every day. And so, and that means I'm getting more linoleic acid, but that's okay because I actually need that. Linoleic acid is readily used by the mitochondria as a substrate for energy. It's a good energy source. The problem is when it's excessive and it's getting built, and then it's overpopulating the cell membrane. Because at the end of the day, what the body's going to do with cell membranes, it's got to build intact membranes. Has no option. So it's going to build them out of whatever it has available. And so if you have low availability of DHA and EPA, then that's going to create a void in that, what it's going to fill it up with is what it has. What it can always produce itself is saturated fat. So if it has to, it'll plug that up with saturated fat, which I commonly see high saturated fat indexes on patients with deficiencies in other essential fatty acids, which creates rigid membranes, right? That affects membrane fluidity, which in the brain has a direct impact on synaptic function, right? So that's critically important, membrane fluidity, and polyunsaturated fats are maintaining that. But if your diet is higher in linoleic acid, then you're going to overpopulate those membranes with linoleic acid, and now you're tilted into production of inflammatory eicosanoids rather rather than tamping down inflammation. And I'm sure you've talked about that plenty of times. But on the Metabolomics report, so these essential macronutrients, you're looking at it two ways. One, sometimes you're actually measuring it, like alpha tocopherol and fatty acids and niacinamide and nicotinic acid and others and peroxidine. But then you're looking at metabolites of those nutrients. Are they being utilized, and are they being utilized in the right pathways? And you're also looking at nutrient-linked metabolism. In some fat cases, people have the nutrients, but the linkage is broken. And so the chemical reactions are still not taking place. And that's actually fixed through different interventions than just taking more nutrients.
And so that's where Therium really shines, right? Because your blood work just shows you the thing.
Yeah.
What Therium's looking at, it's looking at it, and this is how your body works, guys. And I know many of you know this, it's a series of chemical reactions and pathways from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4. And what Therium's looking at is saying, well, if you have the material for step 1 and step 2, but you're never getting to step 4, what is it along that chain that's broken?
That's exactly right.
And that's the magic in fixing it. Because
in those cases, giving us the intervention that will likely work based on research, because that's not something I can intuit.
Right. And exactly, because the instinct, without that clarity, people might take more of the nutrient. Yeah. But never just have a backup of nutrient without ever getting to the end goal.
And actually creating log jams in other pathways and creating problems.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the real, I think that's the value of a metabolomics test that, and so few clinicians know about it still. It's still in its infancy.
Yeah, the evolution, they're evolving those reports in a way where it'll be more clinician friendly and more consumer friendly and more directly applicable. And that's an active work in process, and they're going to do a great job of it.
Yeah.
It's tough. Even for me, I had a big learning curve, right, to integrate this. And I had to trust it because I have to trust their AI. And so I had to really do a lot of runs with patients I trust who let me experiment on them and know, sometimes we're going to miss target a little bit, and then have it with the comparative data, right? Yeah. Not as a solo. Like I had to be able to look at with a tox report, with an intracellular nutrient report, with a prodrome report, because it was interesting because every time Therium showed a block in beta oxidation of fatty acids, I would actually see that on a prodrome report as well, that there was a fatty acid elongation issue. And so that congruency really helped build up my trust. But to the other point of your question, like what are the commonalities that I've seen now well before I had metabolomics tests that prompted me to really push in on this whole higher dose broad-based essential nutrient for a person who's not been supplementing. Right? Eating a normal diet. I'm not going to call it a standard American diet, just a normal diet where we feel healthy. Almost 100% of the time, we're going to see deficiencies in essential fatty acids. Almost 100% of the time. Right? And that's critical because that's cell membranes and that's where it all starts. Phospholipids are not technically an essential fatty acid. Your body builds them. But I do typically see deficiencies in phosphatidylcholine. Right? Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes also phosphatidylethynolamine, but not as common. And then the B vitamins, right? I was shocked. I knew that it was common in our population to have suboptimal B12, suboptimal folate. And, if you had MTHFR, you needed to come in anyway with that. But when I began seeing the low levels of niacin, thiamine, riboflavin, pantothenic acid, it was across the board. It was over. Now, what I wouldn't see necessarily, sometimes I did, was outright deficiency, meaning you're going to get sick and have a medical problem if this isn't fixed. What I saw was that intracellularly, you had the bare minimum, right? Yeah. And then so you could sustain a baseline level of biochemical function that would sustain life. But the demand pressure you wanted to put on your system, forget about it. Because then most nutrients are consumed in biochemical reactions. Not always. Sometimes they can be recycled, but most of the time they're consumed. So once they've been utilized, they've been utilized. And if you're not replenishing and maintaining higher intracellular reserve, then there's only so much biochemical demand pressure your system can sustain. Period. At the end of the day. And there are a lot of other dynamics here, electromagnetic frequencies and energetics and things that we could get into that are also impacting these systems, but we're focusing on the biochemistry right now. So the B vitamins, magnesium, that's no surprise to anybody because they've done population health studies on that one. Population health studies have consistently shown depleted magnesium, depleted riboflavin, and depleted niacin in our population. And niacin is the basis of NAD. That's your first level of solving your NAD problem, is making sure you have what it's built out of in the first place. And then I would commonly see deficiencies in zinc and selenium as two minerals. Now, occasionally I would see copper was deficient or a different mineral was deficient, but the big clusters were the essential fatty acids, the phosphatidylcholine, vitamin D, of course, and then the B vitamins and a few key minerals. Now, what I also started seeing in the last few years that I didn't used to see is CoQ10 depletion as well.
Interesting.
Which I think is, I could be wrong, but I think it's a oxidative stress, mitochondrial oxidative stress problem.
Well, because it's a massive piece of the puzzle in the antioxidant chain.
Yes. So yeah, I used to, for most people, like CoQ10 levels would come in okay. I'm talking about not just in the blood, like intracellular. And now it's half the time we're starting with low CoQ10, even in healthy people who've come to see me.
Interesting. Have you messed around with mitochondrial yet or not yet?
I haven't. I have recommended it for a few people that like where we really like their need for ubiquinol, the mitochondria was like critical. And so I did go there because based on their research and their claims, but otherwise not. It's, these things all add up in cost. Right.
Yeah.
And when you're, and
you gotta pick your poison. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I've seen is generally with good quality ubiquinol, and there's ubiquinone and ubiquinol, right? One's reduced, ubiquinol is reduced as an electron donor, one's oxidized, ubiquinone is an electron receiver. If you're younger and healthier, ubiquinone is probably the thing that you would use. And if you're older or sicker, ubiquinol, you'll actually need that electron donation. Metabolomics will actually tell you which form you want to use. For what they're detecting. But generally, a good quality ubiquinone or ubiquinol has, and follow-up studies have suggested it fixed the problem.
Nice. So once we've addressed those nutritional foundations, what do people feel different?
Yeah. On that? Yeah, that was the big thing, is that it was like I feel like that one was great because, like we talked about earlier, fixing mitochondrial membranes may be a 9-month process. The just repleting nutrients, typically within 2 to 3 weeks, people would say, I feel better. My energy is better. Yeah.
And so did you create something for nutrient repletion?
I did. Yeah. Because,
are you still using it or?
Yeah. It's all my patients use it because, because originally I had, what I had was the phospholipid complex, the fat soluble complex, the essential fatty acids, maybe a fish oil or some other source. Then I had your full spectrum B complex because the B vitamin load in a multivitamin wasn't covering, and I couldn't find one that did the dosing that we needed. Then I had, of course, just the adequate dosing of mineral complex. Then we got fulvic and humic, right, that are critical. And so it was working. This was years ago. It's working. People are taking 8 different products, 15 capsules a day, and some solution, but it's working, and they're not complaining, even though it's cumbersome. And I just had it in my mind that if we could somehow create a unification of those into common formulas, that would make everybody's life easier and cheaper. And I finally found a company in Oregon that I could formulate that with. And so we have our essential nutrients is the B vitamins, the patented form of shea, so it has the fulvic and humic already intermingled in at the dose that was studied for the patent, along with the mineral complex and carotenoids. And then our essential fats has phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylserine, 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids, ratio to DHEA slightly higher than MPA, A, E, D, and K, and ubiquinone CoQ10. So, boom.
The basic.
And my children became much happier because they bought in their teenage years, because when they started using the nutrient support, they felt better. And they were like, they went off to college with their big baskets. But when I created my formulations and replaced those 8 products with 2, they were pretty happy about that.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. All right. So there's an explosion of genetic and metabolomic tests. Like there's a new one every day.
Yes.
I threw 2 at you before we started recording that you're like, I haven't seen that yet. What have you learned in the past year about all these new tests that are coming out? Like what should and should not be used for longevity? Do you have any thoughts on that? Or how do people look at them critically?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of options, and everybody is going to make claims and possibly have some data to support those claims, probably. At the end of the day, with the more complex, like epigenetics, when we start looking, I mean, genetics is genetics, right? And people are going to have various algorithms or how many polymorphisms they look at to evaluate a pathway. But for the most part, I feel like the the tests that have been available for some time in the genetic space that would look at, say, detox pathways, methylation, glutathione synthesis pathways, and fitness, I think those are still pretty good, right? Like in
It's
terms
good
of
information to have.
yeah. But when it comes to the metabolomics, so Genova's a great company. I used to use their metabolomics testing. I still think it's a good product. It doesn't have the same number of metabolites, nor do I think the algorithms are as sophisticated or as precise when it comes to interpretation as, say, Therium. But really what you're looking at is the complexity of the data sets. And so how well is the AI trained? Who's been training it, and what databases has it been searching, and how well is it trained to come to its conclusions? Because I don't care how skilled as a clinician you are, you're probably not going to be able to actually create the precise interpretations yourself off of all of these various metabolites and their critical ratios. So what I really try to do with testing is to vet, and I think everybody has great quality. I'm not suggesting any one test out there is not really good or exceptional or maybe better than the testing I'm using. I'm just talking about my experience in this space, is getting to know the researchers behind the test, getting to know their particular pedigrees and experience in their domain of expertise within where this testing is reported to go, and how they're building out their AI neural engines and the data sets it's got access to train itself. To me, that's the critical piece. And then it's a matter of, does it actually add value to the clinical process? Because this is important to know, right? Like we talked about this earlier. There's all this information we can gather. How you're going to apply it is the critical piece. And ultimately, there is a major gap between where most people are starting off on their health journey of health optimization and where, that they could be taken. Like most people, you're going to start with these foundations we're talking about. Begin to mitigate stress, start cleaning up the toxins, clean up the environment, work on the gut, replete nutrients, support antioxidants. Like for most people, that's step one. And for people who are new to this type of medicine, that's a lot.
Yeah,
right?
It's life-changing.
Yeah. They went from taking a multivitamin to, using a lot of different resources, but it was life-changing, and they buy in because not only do they experience the result, you can measure the result and show them the result. So it's a matter of, is this additional data going to meaningfully change? What am I going to do for this individual human system? Is it going, or is it just marginal? And I believe that there's the metabolomic space will be highly competitive, and many people will have brilliant AI. Therium will have many competitors. I don't have a financial relationship with Therium at all. It's just a tool I use. I do have a very friendly relationship with their team because I've asked for an enormous amount of their time going through reports and getting to know them. But
well, they love that about you, though.
Yeah, but ultimately, at this point in my assessment of what's available, from a metabolomics, I believe Therium is the best test in the marketplace for actionable information, meaningful information. It's not marginal. It's not going to, it's really going to help me. It's going to reveal the blind spots and help me dial in. And as I mentioned earlier, potentially use less interventions rather than more interventions for a human system to move in the direction that it wants to. With metabolomics, to the extent that it's accurately indexing the toxicants, nowadays, like depending on people's financial situation, I might not run the full tox report to start. I may just look at what's going on metabolomically. And if it's not too bad, then we might just be able to match a detox to what's going on and measure it that way. I'm not running comprehensive intracellular nutrient reports any longer because I trust Therium to point me to those potential deficiencies and insufficiencies. Honestly, I don't really, unless it's a neurodegenerative case, I don't really run prodrome any longer either, because the functional aspects are actually well elucidated on Therium. Now, what I don't have on Therium yet is the inventory of phospholipids and plasmalogens, but they tell me that's coming. And they are actually looking at phospholipid as a component of cell membrane. So there are a lot of times reports will say you need a lot of phosphatidylcholine, right? You need a lot of phosphatidylserine. So right now, what I'm doing, and I feel like for most people, it gets me there. I always want the full blood panel, always. Yeah, that is absolutely key. And then as much of the subjective as I can possibly get. And I do think things like functional metrics like VO2 max and exercise capacities and strength and hand grip strength and all of those and walking pace. Those are all really important and helpful. And then I use the Theriome, and if the person's interested, I'll add epigenetic age testing and look at, pace of aging and look at what I have also seen is that when aging pathways do look compromised on Theriome, not always, but if say a new patient who hasn't been doing this type of work, we'll also see that pace of aging is over 1 on their epigenetic age test, which has been interesting. In your case, it's not. And it's not likely going to ever get there. It could have tracked in that direction.
If I was heading there.
Yeah, you were going to head there, but it wasn't going to get there. So despite all the technologies that are available, at the end of the day, there's still just a handful, I think, that make the difference in our clinical assessment and how we guide a patient on a journey of health optimization.
Yeah. The stress piece that we talked about earlier, the sympathetic.
Yeah. So autonomic nervous system testing of some sort. Yes.
Yeah, is absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move into our final stretch here. Our future outlook, hope, direction, and next gen longevity. So given everything that you're seeing, the sympathetic dominance, the toxicity, the nutrient gaps, the environmental load, what gives you optimism about the future of human health?
Well,
and you're an optimistic guy. So
I am an optimistic guy. One, I really firmly believe in the brilliance of human design. I do. I believe we have amazingly adaptive systems that are oriented to life itself, but beyond that towards thriving. That's part of all of our neurotransmitter involvement, and the way we feel, the healthier that we get. And I believe that is a strong primal driving force within human beings. I think it was easy for a generation to tune out into the status quo as long as the manifestations of diseases were not like what they are now. Right. So most people didn't have diagnoses of metabolic diseases, and most people didn't have fibromyalgia and severe all these things. It was easy to kind of tune out and just coast. Now, because of the awareness of the trajectory of chronic disease in our population, what's happening in our aging population, which is people are getting dementia at younger ages, cancer at younger ages, vascular disease issues at younger ages, like lifespan is reducing, health span is reducing. People see that and they're like, okay, I need to pay attention, right? So part of this is sort of waking us up and allowing that deep-seated primal drive towards life and thriving to activate, motivate, and take us where we want to go. I also firmly believe your body will teach you. Like the more that you do this, the more that you don't necessarily always have to do a test, right? You're able to intuitively understand what's going on in your own body and what it's attuning you to and what its specific needs are at this time, and being able to move in those directions. Now, the other piece that I don't almost want to go there because it makes us technology dependent, but I'm optimistic because of the technologies, right?
Yeah,
because
that will tap into them properly.
Yeah, because of how quickly I just mentioned that on the diagnostic side that right now I'm, not necessarily like we've got all these incredible things. We didn't bring up full body MRI. We do arterial assessment, CIMT. I order coronary calcium scores, potential CT angiogram. So these are important things that I didn't mention earlier that are part of like assessing arterial health, endothelial function that we also do as part of our evaluations. There's Grail liquid biopsy cancer screening, and there's another test that I think is going to be better coming out. So these are all still potentially important, but the rapid expansion. So I think that when we do have accurate and actionable multi-omics where we have the metabolome, proteome, transcriptome, full genome sequencing, and biome integrated with that we're going to be able to it's going to be amazing how we can really begin to tune our human systems in the way that they're needed and build up that resiliency. And then imaging modalities, and then in the regenerative space, the biologics, right? So stem cells, manipulated stem cells, exosomes combined with peptides, new stem cells. These things have enormous promise for human systems. And so I think that as these technologies get the right research behind them and we understand really what they can do, what they can't do, and it's going to evolve so quickly. It's going to,
it's exponential.
Today's hottest, best, most potent stem cell that has been manipulated in these particular ways with growth factors and differentiate is going to be replaced within a year with an even better, right? That can possibly do more precise work in a human system. And so I believe that the technologies, because this pursuit of living our healthiest life is obviously critical for everyone. It's a big target. There's an enormous amount of financial capital in it. Trillions of dollars will be invested in this space. And I believe that we're going to end up in a situation for people who are willing to submit to a deeper level of testing and willing to submit to using interventional protocols to tune their system, that they're going to be able to, we're going to leave behind this story of chronic disease. I really do.
Yeah.
But it's going to take time and it's going to take awareness. You're part of that by having this podcast and putting this information out there.
Thank you. All right. Well, you answered my second question. So we'll go to the last question, which is if you could give every listener one simple actionable step to improve their metabolomic health signature this week, what would it be? Just
go take walks outside in a pretty serene, safe space.
Beautiful. I love it.
Broad spectrum sunlight, no sunglasses on, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no sunglasses on, get the photon receptors working on your retina. Just walking outdoors in a serene place that feels safe works on mitochondrial biogenesis, mitochondrial function. It works on stress response systems, autonomic, gut biome. That would be, if you're only gonna do one thing, that'd be the thing I'd do.
I love it. Dr. Gus Vickery, you rocked it as always. Thank you for your time.
It's easy to rock it with you, Nat. It's hard to miss.
So why don't we just leave people with, where do they find you? Like if somebody wanted to work with you or someone in your clinic, I mean, I know you've now expanded the clinic, you have more practitioners there. So how do people find Dr. Gus?
Yeah. So my personal website is Dr. V, wait, hold on. No, it's drgusvickery.com, drgusvickery.com. And that's a site that honestly, we're really more minimizing and directing people to our Authentic Health website, which is www.authentichealth.com, which is our clinic site. And most of the content, blogs, podcasts, and interviews and things that I've had posted at my personal site have now moved over. We're integrating and building that out because our clinic is called Authentic Health. We're a team. We're on this mission, right, of helping everybody that we can help. And, it was founded in primary care for all those years of just community medicine. And so we're really trying to make this more about this team and its mission and what it's doing rather than me personally. And so authentichealth.com is probably the best place to learn more about us. But at that personal site, there is more specific information about me.
Amazing. I love it. And I've sent a couple people your way and I got to tell you guys, the reviews are always phenomenal. So, and that's not always the case. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for always being willing to take the call and listen to the, oh my God, you're not going to believe what I just found.
I love it. I'd be completely clueless of what's going on out there if I didn't have you, Natalie.
Well, thank you so much, Gus. It's been a pleasure. And until we meet again.